Hello there, my name's Marty Braden. Whether it was your interest or your curiosity that made you click on my video, I'm sure glad you're watching it. I promise you that I'll do my best to make it pay off. The information I'll be sharing with you today is titled The Wasteful Impulse of Religion. To help you understand why I'm doing the videos like this one, let me take a moment and briefly explain why I started this channel. Once you know the why, it'll make all the difference. I've been retired since September of 2015, and about 2.5 years ago I had an experience where I needed to do some research on atheist Richard Dawkins and on his book, The God Delusion, so I read it. Upon reading it, I found myself taking notes that turned into a manuscript I later titled An Atheist Delusion, a Latter-day Saints perspective on atheist Richard Dawkins' anti-theist, anti-Christ book, The God Delusion. After publishing it, I decided to record a series of short videos so I could cover every single argument Richard Dawkins puts forth in his book in an effort to convince his readers like you and I that God doesn't exist. This video you're watching now is part 88. I have a whole series of videos and I'm already up to 88. So with that said, I'm going to pick it up from where I left off, which was the subtitle called Direct Advantages of Religion. So let's go right to that. I'll always get a chuckle out of Richard's sarcasm. Here's another example of it that I felt might be worth mentioning. It's right here at the start of this subtitle, Direct Advantages of Religion. Richard quotes George Bernard Shaw, who's quite a character himself, just like Richard is. Here's Mr. Shaw's comment, quote, "The fact that a believer is happier than a skeptic is no more to the point than the fact that a drunken man is happier than a sober one." Very fun. Richard later quotes an American comedian, Kathy Ladman, who observed, quote, "All religions are the same. Religion is basically guilt with different holidays." These people are so funny. Richard then says, "Religion is a large phenomenon and it needs a large theory to explain it." Yeah, sure does. This sums up Richard's reason for including this chapter where he tries to answer questions about religion. In this subtitle, Richard tries to lay out what he hopes is a believable theory or two for why religion came into existence, and then gives a precedence as to why he believes Darwinian natural selection is the large answer that's needed for answering this need for religion question. Richard asked the question, quote, "Why does a mind evolve?" And I put in parentheses, a mind, Richard, not a wet brain, "to find comfort in beliefs it can plainly see are false." Plainly see, Richard? A mind seen? Shouldn't it be find comfort in beliefs the wet brain, can plainly imagine? A person with eyes sees, and the mind of a person understands what they see, so that the person can then say, "I see that, I understand that." Maybe it's in this context that Richard is referring to when he says, "it can plainly see." Only Richard knows what he meant when he said understands what they see, because atheists and naturalists don't believe in a mind or a spirit within the body. They believe that's all in the wet man, firing off neuron. Bing, choo, ch, ch. Richard's reasoning and guess as to why religion came about truly seems to be a contradiction. Richard says, what pressure or pressures exerted by natural selection originally favored the impulse to religion? Good question, Richard. Why indeed? He continues, religion is so wasteful, so extravagant, and Darwinian selection, with its rules, and there are many of them, habitually targets and eliminates waste. So why didn't it reject this impulse, Richard? In other words, if religion came from the process of an unguided, non-intended pressure that mindlessly happens within the neurons exploding in the wet brains of some distant couple, all at the same time without intended purpose, who then produced the start of the next generation, a supposed better generation of thinkers? Or what caused their parental egg and sperm to come together and activate itself in such a way that it brought on this impulse? Wouldn't this selective process have spit out this wasteful impulse to express some kind of faith before it finished its production of that offspring? Since it and its so-called natural selecting mind, as Richard calls it, would be so destructive to the survival of a healthy, right-thinking person. Why did it not follow the rule, Richard? Obviously it didn't, did it? Nope. This kind of reasoning to me is simply a grasping of straws that scientists like Richard often act out when trying to produce a plausible theory for any implausible reality they can't really explain or can't stand for that matter. And in other words, scientists often back themselves into a corner, just as Richard has done to himself here, by putting forth this excuse of a theory about religion's beginnings. Natural selection directing the beginnings of religion? Really? Are you kidding me? Being aware of the criticism that will come to me for suggesting that religion is what I call the pure system supporting pure faith in God, and that it is what follows any dispensing of pure truth by God himself to his prophets. I ask my readers and my viewers to hang in here with me as I try to give my perspective to questions about religion that Richard says are needing to be answered. Once I have, you can make your choice as to which perspective or argument makes more sense to you as a reference leg for your stand of support to your belief table. I know Richard would accuse me once again of trying to fill a gap in knowledge by calling it God. As long as atheists believe that religion, no matter whether it's pure or not, comes from man's evolution and not from God's mind, they will continue to say that this gap or lack of knowledge regarding the big questions is simply theists using the God to fill those gaps. Richard feels that one day this gap will be replaced by a theory postulated by a scientist who discovers the true reason for religion coming into existence. That to me is an admittance. They have no clue now. It hasn't happened yet. Come on, scientists, come up with it. Richard's hoping it will because he doesn't have an answer. He doesn't have a clue. But I say there is no gap here and that Richard will be waiting for a very, very, very long time. As you will see, Richard simply postulates a variety of possible theories about why religion is the way it is and how it might have come to be. In my opinion, Richard provides very little, if any, well-informed reference leg evidence in his subtitle, Direct Advantage of Religion, that supports the claim that God does not exist. It's just Richard expressing his opinion in an annoyingly pompous and dogmatic way. After reading this entire chapter, it seemed to be a continual grasping at the straws by Richard. As I've already said, I see it as an atheist delusion because Richard is incapable of using his scientific mind to imagine that there might actually be something, some kind of elegant, eternal, magnificent being who is so incredibly brilliant and all-powerful that he could very well have organized all that we see and don't see in this world and in the heavens above, including the unseen spirit world and its dimension, as well as pure religion itself. That, for those of you who have eyes to see and ears to hear, is the theory of everything. Richard's proposed theory, for me, is as though he's taking the skin of this theory and stuffing it full of what I call delusional guessing. And this delusional guessing always seems to be constructed with or manufactured by the unseen crane of Darwinian natural selection, his go-to answer for everything. Richard's next subtitle is another example of delusional guessing. It's called group selection. But before I close this off, I wanted to go over a couple things with you. The question Richard put forth in this subtitle, and that he is trying to address by coming up with a theory that meets the rules of natural selection, is: why did religion come into existence in the first place? Why indeed? It's born out of the fact that Richard doesn't accept the premise that God is that why. He doesn't accept the idea that God gave his plan of happiness to his son and the prophets to deliver to the world, and this revealing of his gospel is that reason. And because Richard rejects the idea of an existing God, he feels it's absolutely necessary that he constructs a theory that allows his mother of all solutions to these types of theist-based questions to become that why. Even the mechanism he calls natural selection. Natural selection to Richard is a simple mechanism that causes or directs all populations of every living thing to change over time, and the reason or reasons behind this directing of change is the principle described as the survival of the fittest, meaning organisms, or people too, that or who best adjust to their environment and are the most successful in surviving and reproducing. They are those that survive. Anything that doesn't lead to this priority of survival is ultimately eliminated. Evolutionists like Richard believe that this mechanism is so simple that it can be broken down into 5 basic steps. It's called VISTA: variation, inheritance, selection, time, and adaptation, or what's often called exaptation. They say because resources are limited in nature, organisms with heritable traits that favor survival and reproduction would tend to leave more offspring than their peers, causing the traits that most lead to survival to increase in frequency over the many generations. They say that there are 3 rules of natural selection. It is the inevitable outcome of just 3 principles. Most characteristics are inherited, number 1. Number 2, more offspring are produced and are able to survive. And number 3, and offspring with more favorable characteristics will survive and have more offspring than those individuals with less favorable traits. This mechanism, called natural selection, they say, is that individuals who are better adapt to a given set of environmental conditions are given an advantage over those that are not as well adapted. In other words, natural selection directs the elimination of anything that doesn't help the organism or individual to survive. Richard described it in this way. We've said it before, but I think you'll find it interesting to hear it again. Religious rituals stand out like peacocks in a sunlit glade. Religious behaviors are the writ large human equivalent of anting or bower building. It is time-consuming, energy-consuming, often as extravagantly ornate as the plumage of a bird of paradise. Religion can endanger the life of the pious individual as well as the lives of others, and so that alone should have been reason enough for natural selection to have blocked man's impulse for religion and faith from surviving. However, with this view of natural selection being so ingrained in his mind, Richard couldn't help but ask himself, how does religion fit into the theory of natural selection? What pressure or pressures were exerted by natural selection originally so that it favored the wasteful impulse of religion so that mankind in fact became religious? Why indeed, Richard? By asking these questions, it certainly shows that Richard doesn't see how religion and practicing it helps mankind to survive. He truly believes that natural selection should have eliminated the wasteful impulse of religion. But it didn't. That is a contrary. How can you solve both contraries? When you consider that it's been approximately 6,000 years since the fall of Adam and Eve, which is when time as we know it began to be tracked, those 6,000 years obviously fall way short of the needed time it would take for natural selection to direct the formation of a naturally selected concept of religion within the wet brain of all human beings that would meet its standards and rules regarding the survival of the fittest. Or the vast majority of them anyway. We're talking ubiquitous here, right? To me, no matter how you look at it, religion is not a man-made invention or an impulse that evolved over millions of years. Religion is the impulse to live out the gospel that God himself revealed to mankind, time and time again through his prophets. It was revealed to his prophets, and they then took it to their generations. It wasn't concocted out of some cave-dwelling Cro-Magnon man's dream of a pizza dream, I call. He didn't have pizza then, but whenever we have one of those weird dreams, it's because we ate late at midnight, ate a pizza and root beer, and man, we see all sorts of things. It didn't happen that way. I had to add this a little bit because it was a short thing, but I wanted to make sure that you understood where my perspective is. There's so many contradictions that Richard gives in his descriptions here. Mind, wet brain, impulse, evolution. It's just an interesting thing to me that atheists just cannot stand the concept of God, so they concoct these unbelievable, quite imaginary ideas, and they call them theories with no testing, no scientific method, no research, no predicting. It's all a guess. It's all a postulate they put out there, which is a big guess. So just any thoughts you have on this, any questions you have, please share them. But until next time, I want to wish you continued success. Goodbye.